So first, can you just kind of touch on your season, this year? Worst finish of ninth, best finish of fourth. What's been the biggest difference between this year and last year?
I'd say probably for me the biggest difference so far has just been the work that we've put in the off season. I went and did CT Frock before my season really got started here, and that was a big help for me. Just more racecraft, more time in a car, particularly more qualifying sessions, which is typically where I struggled last year. So just working on those kind of aspects, I think, have been the biggest kind of change for me and difference coming into this year. And more seat time obviously helps as well. Just getting back into the swing of things here. Taking that time off in sports cars really had a big impact on my open wheel career, and so it's taken me longer than I anticipated to kind of jump back into an open wheel car, especially with the lack of experience I've had in them. I think those are really the biggest differences for me. It was just extra experience before the season even started, and then more track time and a bigger emphasis on some of the pre-race work that I do at home and at the shop.
And you kind of touched on your sports car experience. Well, that really didn't come with any oval experience, maybe outside of a few corners at Daytona. So what's kind of been your biggest adjustment, trying to get better at these ovals?
The ovals are hard. They're really high commitment. They require something a little bit different than the road courses. I think a lot of people, when we have drivers come over from Europe and they don't really respect the oval a lot, and we see that they end up doing really well and they grow to actually enjoy it. But when they come over at first, it's kind of the first day or two in an oval is hard for them to get used to everything. So I think that just showcases how unique an oval really is. For my case, I think the sports car side had no effect really on my ovals or no help. Ovals have been a struggle for me, for sure. Aside from maybe Iowa in 23 was pretty solid, but we ended up running a lot of downforce there, so the car was very easy to drive. And then, trying to get faster on the oval and get better and better qualifying sessions and better race pace is learning to adapt and drive a car that's kind of on the limit. It's not necessarily easy to drive. And then also the way you think about it is a little bit of the opposite of what you actually kind of want. You're really hustling a car into the corner, and that's different from the traditional road course style of kind of very slowing the car down initially and getting that good exit. It's a very different way of thinking.
And how does Gateway, if you look at that schedule, you have Iowa heavy banked oval, Milwaukee's pretty flat, and Gateway's pretty in between. So what kind of sets Gateway apart in difficulty compared to the other ovals on the schedule?
I think Gateway personally is the most difficult oval we go to because 1 and 2 is so different from 3 and 4. It's the only track that we go to as an oval where it's not symmetrical. It's not really the same on both ends. And for me that is really what gives you that challenge of turn 1 and 2 is going to drive very differently than 3 and 4. 3 and 4 here for us is flat. It's not as long as you have the right setup on the car, it should be easy. It's mainly a line thing there, but 1 and 2. You need the line, but you also need to understand how much you can lift, where you have to start that lift, making sure that lift is nice and smooth and progressive, and then the downshifts and doing those at the right time to not shake the car and really result in a nice snap. So, I think Gateway is personally for me the most difficult oval we go to.
Now, I would be remiss not to ask you a question with Le Mans this weekend. So, when you went to Le Mans in 2022, 2023, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were 16 and 17 years old. So, just kind of walk me through what that experience was like, racing in the 24-hour Le Mans.
Yeah, I mean, before you walked up, I was watching the onboard of the McLaren United car, so, I definitely miss being there. I love that event. I love endurance racing in general, and my gold status kind of, pushed me away from endurance racing, and my goal's been IndyCar anyway since I was little, so, but I'd love to get back in an endurance car whenever I can, hopefully soon in the future. But that's such a unique experience, to have been able to get to do that at 16 and 17 and in 22, 23 was something special. It's a lot of drivers, they try their whole life to go compete there and don't get to, and to have had 2 years there, especially that second year being the centenary year and the 100th anniversary was very special. So I'm disappointed to not be there, but happy to be here in St. Louis and working towards my IndyCar career.
And not only did you race in Le Mans, but you also won in WEC, right, at Sebring. So, what does it mean to kind of be a proven winner in the biggest endurance racing series in the world?
It's so special, so special. I'm really grateful to have had those experiences. I think my WEC career ended with 4 podiums in total, 2 of which being wins. So, to have had those experiences and to have been a part of that championship and to have driven with some big names like Tom Blomqvist, Ollie Jarvis, Alex Lynn, learning from those guys and getting to be a part of that environment was something incredible, and I wouldn't trade the time I spent there for anything. So, super grateful to have had that experience and to have been a part of that program. And I'm sure that what I've learned there is going to help me later down on the line in IndyCar and also even if I'm back in a sports car in the near future.
And kind of one last question about on the endurance subject, but what was your favorite part? Well, if you had to take away one thing from your experience in Le Mans, what was your favorite part?
The night driving is super unique there. I think that's something that people often comment on. Every year it seems to get a little bit lighter. They add more lights in places, but I remember my first year compared to my second year and just how dark it was. So I think that's kind of what makes it unique. I think my favorite part about the endurance racing in general in Le Mans is just that feeling of unity in a car, When you're really enjoying the two other drivers you're working with, it feels like a small family, you and the mechanics, and it's a different team atmosphere than something like here where you're the only driver in the car and I have teammates but you're still trying to beat them. So I love that atmosphere. I love sharing a car with two other guys, and just that feeling of unity and teamwork that you get from it is so exhilarating.
And you kind of mentioned it earlier, you wanted to be an IndyCar driver ever since you were little. So what kind of led you to sports car racing first, and how did you get back into American open wheel racing?
So Steven Simpson, my driver, coach, and spotter, he's here this weekend. He'll be spotting for me. He obviously had a lot of sports car experience with JDC and in LMP2. And he is who got me the initial test to come into sports cars. And for us, it was more just, if the test went well and I had the opportunity, it was one of those decisions where why wouldn't I do it? It's 2 years, and that PR1 test at Buttonwillow is what led to my United test and gave me the WEC opportunity. So it was just a case of kind of one thing leading to another, and what I've learned there, the fuel saving, tire management, driver changes, real pit stops, live pit stops, all that stuff is going to be really useful coming into a pit stop series like IndyCar. And while I'm not going to get to use it in Indy next year, having that previous experience is a big step forward to when I jump into a category like IndyCar, or when I go back to sports cars, and now I'm having to do those things again. I have to fuel save, I have to manage tires, that kind of thing. So I think it's very valuable to have had those experiences previously.
And how do you make the adjustment from doing like 2 to 3 hour stints to the whole race being maybe less than an hour and a half some race weekends?
It's a hard change. Here we're flat out the whole time. There's really any kind of fuel save or tire management. Some races we have to look after the tire a little bit more just because that track has higher degradation, but it's not to the same degree you would in an endurance car, right? So that's one of the things I struggled with coming back was changing that mentality to, I just need to get the car to the next guy and kind of hand off the reins, and I just need to do my job. And coming back into a mentality of I need to be moving forward all the time. I need to be really charging hard. So it was hard to make that jump and to flip. And I think it's one of the more unique aspects of a race car driver is if you're doing both endurance racing and a sprint series, right? You're having to have this mentality flip. And it's difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. It's very two drastically different ways of looking at a race.
And on just the Indy NXT kind of series, there's been a debate that happens every month of May, and is if the Freedom 100 should come back around the Indianapolis Oval. So I kind of want to get your take on it, and if you ever see it coming back.
I'd love to see it come back personally. I think the Freedom 100 was one of the best races of the year. I understand the reasonings for not having it. I really do. But I think it's such a unique event for the drivers. I think it's a great way to get Indy NXT drivers experience on the speedway before jumping up to IndyCar, because now if you're an Indy NXT driver coming in, your first day on that oval is going to be in the big car with the not full power because you're going to do the rookie orientation, but it's going to be a lot more overwhelming from my perspective than if you get to do that event as an Indy NXT driver, come in, you get to learn a little bit of how the drafting works, the passing, right? And so I just feel like it's such a cool opportunity that a lot of drivers are missing out on. For sure, I'd love to see it come back. I don't know if it will. I have no information on that aspect for you. I don't even know what our schedule looks like next year. I know Arlington is coming and all that, so I'd be curious to see what next year Indy NXT does. Hopefully, I'd love to see Freedom 100 back on the schedule, but I don't think it will be.
And kind of one last question for you. So, as a kind of sports car driver in WEC, so you've raced countless circuits, kind of around the globe. So, if you have to bring one of these tracks to the Indy NXT schedule, what would it be that's not currently on the schedule?
Spa for sure. I love Spa. Spa is so beautiful as a track, and to drive, it's just fun. It's one of the few circuits I've been to where it races well, but it also just is fun to drive. I think a lot of tracks we have this fine line of it's either really fun to drive and doesn't race very well, or races super well and it's not particularly fun to drive. And that's not saying I'm not having fun in the car. Of course I am, but it just doesn't have the same kind of racing or the same feeling to it. There's no elevation, or the corners aren't as fast, or there's not as many flowing sections to it, and that typically makes a track race better, and so you have more fun from that aspect, but not as much fun driving it. And Spa is very unique in the sense that, for me at least, it does both those things. You know, it's got long straightaways which allow you to race and be competitive, but it also has really flowing, fast sections that feel nice to drive.